A three-part series on Christian nationalism in the United States, and today is the hopeful part.
That's right.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is awesome. We're really glad that you are here. And so let's just dive right in. It's all you.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be back. See a lot of familiar faces, some new faces as well. Good to meet some new folks. This is our third time together. We've covered a lot of territory in a relatively short period of time. Not all of it very promising territory. How about that? Much of it much concerning. So, real brief to kind of catch folks up to speed who haven't been here. We've talked about Christian nationalism as based on the belief that America was founded as a Christian nation, which is not true, but it's a belief that many people hold. Some hold it dear. There's a spectrum of those who would fall on this in this worldview of Christian nationalism. Some who are fairly innocently believe America was founded as a Christian nation and are not deep into it. Some in the middle who are committed to this belief, this false belief, but are not overly aggressive about it. And some who, as we've noticed, are really aggressive about this, and even violent at times, such as January the 6th. So we're talking about a belief that's not true, but it's a belief. And as long as it remains a belief, well, there are all kinds of beliefs that some of us may hold, all of us may hold, that are not necessarily true. It's baseball season. I have a favorite baseball team. I like to think maybe they'll be the best baseball team this year, but who knows? They may or may not be. It's a belief. But if you take a belief like Christian nationalism and you put it into action and try to make it happen, try to make America a Christian nation, that gets dangerous. And so how do we respond to that? And I want to start today by reading you just a few sentences from something that Janet Peterson, who is here, friend, made me aware of just a few days ago. I wasn't even aware of this. There is so much going on in the world of white Christian nationalism. It really is hard to keep up with. And I was just informed a few minutes ago that you have a book on your shelf called The Psychology of Christian Nationalism, which I have not read yet, but I will now. Well, not right now. But so this, some far-right pastors are circulating a statement on Christian nationalism. These folks come from the Reformed tradition of Christianity, the far-right Reformed tradition of Christianity, which teaches a different kind of kingly Jesus that you think of here in this church, but a king Jesus, an angry, violent king Jesus, who is determined to take over the world and subdue the world at his feet, if you will. As we talked about, Jesus in the Gospels rejected that in the wilderness temptations. When evil tempted him to seize the armies and the riches of the world, the governments of the world, and force God upon the world, Jesus said that was evil, and he didn't do it. He went down and taught the Beatitudes, as we know, and presented a different kind of ministry, far different, the opposite of power and glory. So, this is a statement on Christian nationalism. I did a little research on it, and it's been put together by these far-right extremist reformists. And I want to read just a few of these, and just listen as I read this. Some of it is pretty blunt. Christian nationalism is a set of governing principles rooted in Scripture, teaching on Christ's rule as supreme Lord and King of all creation, who has ordained civil magistrates with delegated authority to be under him over the people, to order their ordained jurisdiction by punishing evil and promoting good for his own glory and the common good of the nation. There's a dichotomy here of good and evil. You can see this right away in the opening statement. That good and evil, Satan and God. While Christian nationalism is primarily concerned with the righteous rule of the civil magistrate, Christian nationalism is not just for magistrates, just as submitting to Christ's lordship is not just for magistrates, but for all people. All truth claims and ethical standards must be tested by God's final word, which is Scripture alone. Funny thing is, people interpret Scripture differently, don't they? When you try to do anything like that. We deny that true beliefs, good character, or good conduct can be dictated by any. We deny that true beliefs, good character, or good conduct can be dictated by any authority other than God's revelation. We affirm that God's moral law is enduring and binding on all people, including civil magistrates and nations, throughout all time, and it is summarily comprehended in the Ten Commandments. We further affirm that every political thought must be taken captive to the obedience of Christ. We deny that governing officials may rule autonomously from or apart from the rule of Christ. They have to be under the rule of this perverted understanding of who Jesus is in Christ. In terms of him being a violent ruler. I think there's one or two more here I want to read right quick. Okay, we affirm, this is the Christian nationalists who wrote this are affirming, that specific short-term priorities of Christian nationalism in the context of the United States are repentance and faith, which lead to the abolition of abortion, the defeat of the LGBTQ's agenda of the LGBTQ agenda's various insanities and coercion, placing parents in control of education, de-weaponizing the federal and state bureaucracies which target Christians for censorship and persecution. Have you noticed that happening? That's not really happening, is it? Securing our borders, recapturing our national sovereignty from godless global entities who present a grave threat to civilization like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, etc. And finally, we affirm that the Christian Nationalist Project entails national recognition of essential Christian orthodoxy. They claim to believe the various creeds of the faith, as well as a Christian consensus under Jesus Christ, the supreme Lord and King of all creation, and the establishment of the general equity of the Ten Commandments as the foundational law of the nation. That's what it's all about. Remember Roy Moore in Alabama? Ten Commandments, Roy Moore. You may or may not have heard of him. He was governor, I think, at the time, and he's put a big marble monument of the Ten Commandments in the state capitol, which caused a big ruckus. It actually led to his ultimate demise as well. But so you kind of get a sense of this is their own words. They're pretty committed to transforming our democracy into something that is not democratic anymore, but is more of a theocracy. So this also reminds me of a sermon that was preached by a guy named Jonathan Edwards. Does that name ring a bell? Some of you may ring a bell. He was a Puritan, 18th century Puritan, early 18th century. So kind of several generations down the road from the earliest Puritans who settled in America, came to America, New World. And he preached a sermon in 1741 called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Most folks have at least heard that title somewhere in history. And so he preached a sermon in which he talked about how, so imagine, this is the preacher speaking, and the preacher's telling you how much God hates and despises you because you are inherently wicked and there's nothing good about you, and God is holding you over hell, the flames of hell, like a spider on a web, dangling you over the hellfires. And only by God's grace can you possibly be saved from eternal punishment in hell. And he goes on and on and on about how wicked everyone is, and how God somehow arbitrarily, this is Calvinistic theology, they don't use the word arbitrarily, but chooses who will be saved and who will not be saved. Scared the hell out of people. I mean, really. And it was part of the first great revival in the 1700s. And so people were hearing this stuff, and they were all of a sudden being convicted and going down, walking the aisle and being converted to stay out of hell. There's a brief backstory to this that hell is not actually in the original languages of the scripture. It's the compilation of several components or words in hell from Sheol in the Old Testament to Hades in the New Testament, Tarshish in also the New Testament, and several other Hebrew and Greek words about afterlife, about the afterlife, which no one was fully sure of, and the Jewish people do not believe in an afterlife. In the Old Testament, there's no belief in an afterlife. But it was compiled later on by the Middle Ages into this concept of an eternal damnation, for the eternal hellfire damnation for those who didn't believe in God and never put their faith in God. The word hell itself comes from Norse mythology, around 8th, 9th century Norse mythology. I have to stop and say that. And there was a goddess named Hel, H-E-L. If you go online and you look up you can find so much online these days, but you can find the original text of the original text. You can find a digital text, imprint of that, if you will digitize, of the original King James Version of the Bible, 1611. There's a transition taking place in the early 1600s of hell being moved into the Bible where it wasn't before. Hell is taking the place of these Hebrew and Jewish words combined, or to say Hebrew and Greek words combined into what we now call hell. In the original King James Bible, in at least one occasion, as hell was moving into the biblical scripture now, from the other Hebrew and Roman words, sometimes it's spelled H-E-L-L, which is how we spell hell. And at least one occasion, it is the Norse god Hel, and it's referred to as H-E-L. Hell means is basically underground. It refers to the underground. I live in potato country near Churchill, over to the west of here, and long ago, generations ago, some old timers may still say this. They used to refer to helling potatoes, putting potatoes in underground storage for the winter. Underground, helling potatoes. I can literally see 2 hells from my house. Places where they hell potatoes. So there's this concept of hell, and I'm going to make, I want to frame what we have a conversation about today. One way maybe of thinking about Christian nationalism is there is an inherent belief in this violent, angry God and in the reality of hell, and that they're on the side of the good guys, and everyone else is basically going to hell. So think of this image of a violent, angry God who will send most people to hell because he hates them and they're wicked. And you begin to get into the mentality, I think, of Christian nationalism and how to look at the world. And then yesterday, I opened the Bozeman Chronicle and started reading. Any of you read the Bozeman Chronicle still? Some of you do, maybe you've read like I do. And I started reading through the Chronicle, and I'd be doggone if I didn't find myself start to marking up some things I saw in the Chronicle, which will lead us into conversation today. Because I think we see in a number of articles in yesterday's Chronicle some ways that we can think about resisting Christian nationalism. And I'll begin with a piece about the Oregon Republicans' walkout on the legislature because they wanted to try to prevent the Oregon legislature from passing bills that would protect women's rights and the rights of LGBTQ persons. And so they just left. And the arrangement in Oregon is so many of them left, they can't get business done without a quorum now. Mm-hmm. And so that's in process. And so one of the ways that we can respond to Christian nationalism is in legislatures. We see it both ways, don't we, right now? Mm-hmm. Oregon is trying to protect women's rights and the rights of LGBTQ. That is, the rights of minorities. And some the Republicans in this case don't like it. And the Christian nationalists chose the Republican Party back with Ronald Reagan, beginning with Ronald Reagan, as their avenue for trying to pass their cultural war agenda. And they've kind of taken over much of the Republican Party these days. So, getting elected. I mean, that's just a pragmatic way. We know here in Montana, if you're sitting up in Heller, you have a voice on these matters. And so, now it's not for everyone running for office, but it's very important. It's very difficult in a red state like this, like Montana. And Eastern Oregon is like red Montana, much of rural Montana is, and that we need to have persons in office who are inclusive of others and are willing to voice that. And even if they're in a minority, it's really important for that voice to be there. So voting is important. Number one, to vote folks into office. It's really hard in rural America, if it's like dominated in many ways by rural life, and I live in rural life out west of Bozeman, to get a majority of inclusive people in office. But nonetheless, it is a practical way we can counter Christian nationalism, voting and then serving in office as well. And my next one, I have to go back and forth between our reading glasses these days. And then this next article was titled "Wave of Anti-Trans Bills in GOP-led States Divides Faith Leaders." I hope some of you had a chance to read that. It's a really good piece. And what this piece is about is how Christian nationalism is dividing Christian leaders across America and how they're responding on both sides to this controversy. And one of the quotes here I think is really one of this. It's not a quote from someone. It's the author of this wrote this up. I think it's really perceptive. And it's those who are opposed to Christian nationalism in the faith community are, in this author's wording, this writer's wording, are concerned, outraged, that, quote, Christianity is being invoked to justify laws they view as cruel and hateful. I'm coming to the point of believing that if there's one word that describes really what's behind the far-right component of Christian nationalism especially, it's cruelty. It's hell. It's Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God, preaching a cruel God who sees all humanity as wicked and who hates that, who hates all of us. They would just as soon throw us in hell as anything else. I'm pretty well convinced, coming to be convinced, that that's really what's behind it. It's not just power. Power can be used for good or bad. We can pursue power for different reasons. But cruelty, I think, really hits the spot. They view certain people as cruel, just as Jonathan Edwards' angry God. I mean, from a lens of cruelty, just as Jonathan Edwards' angry God did in his sermon back in 1741. The Southern Baptist Convention has been on record asserting that gender transition is, quote, contrary to God's design. That's on the other side. And that any attempt otherwise is a blatant attempt to undermine the very order of creation. Did you notice that one of the Republican leaders in our Montana legislature this year in an interview discussed how he got involved in politics in the first place? He got involved in politics because he wanted to enact biblical commands into law. But he got into politics in the first place in our legislature because he wanted to enact biblical commandments into law. That's pretty direct, isn't it? There are a number of quotes. I won't go through all of them, but basically a lot of lives are being threatened. This article talks about, and the message that's not being preached, according to faith leaders who oppose to Christian nationalism, the message of love and inclusion is not included in the Christian nationalist world. And we could go on and on. But it's dividing faith leaders. And broadly speaking, it comes down, and this is, I'm kind of putting this in my own way of my wording, if you will. In some ways, it comes down to a heaven and hell divide, in which inclusive faith leaders believe in the value of our common humanity, all created in God's image. And Christian nationalist faith leaders don't buy that at all. They believe most people are wicked, and that their God needs to be the God to rule over them and try to keep their wickedness in check and punish them as need be. It's a vast divide that Christian nationalism has created in faith leaders. This is a major division in Christianity, what I'm just expressing right now. And one of the ways we can oppose Christian nationalism is for those of us who are inclusive in mindset, and I think that reflects the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and otherwise, We just need to communicate this. We need to talk about this within faith communities and otherwise as well. This is something that needs to be in public discourse to a large degree. And we need to think about what it means to be inclusive too, I think, as well. Another one here, Pittsburgh Jewish community monitoring hate speech amid trial of synagogue massacre suspect. This is from Pittsburgh. That this was in Pittsburgh, the Jewish community was attacked by hate speech, and then there was the massacre in the synagogue. And this stands out because this is a legacy of much Christian, if we're honest, hatred towards Jews over the centuries in much of Christian history. Nazism was a form of white Christian nationalism. Nazis expressly considered themselves to be Christians. Hitler did as well. He talked about it a lot, about his faith even in Jesus. It was not the kind of Jesus we embrace or think about. But he was doing Jesus' and God's work in lifting up white people above everyone else, and even in persecuting, ultimately slaughtering Jewish people. Cruelty in the name of God. Another one here was yesterday, or actually it's today. Today's the 14th. Is the 1 year anniversary of the Tops shooting in Baltimore, Maryland, of the murders of so many black people in the Top supermarket by a white supremacist who shot and killed. It was an assault rifle toting white supremacist who killed 9 people, various ages, and the trauma from that. Cruelty, again in the name of God. This was a white supremacist shooting in Baltimore a year ago today, and if we're honest historically, what we're now referring to as Christian nationalism in America today does have its roots and does have its current still in white supremacy. It's white, and it is the basis of it is the belief that the white race is a superior race. That is still the basis, broadly speaking, of white Christian nationalism to this day. All of these stories in one article. Actually, there's one more. These crates came up real quick. I made notes to myself and try to keep up with it. Yes. Okay. Where's my? Here we go. 2 more. There's a story about Ukraine. It says talking about retaking territory. That Ukraine is retaking territory from Russia. The Holocaust led to World War II, as we know. We have war again in that part of the world with the Russian-Ukraine war. So voting is one way that we can respond to Christian nationalism. I cannot stress how important that is. And if everyone voted, if in America we all voted, I don't think we'd be having this conversation today, in all honesty. But their effort to suppress the vote, as we know in much of America, and have been throughout American history. Seeking political office, if that's something that you have time to do and can bring your inclusive voice to, that's also very important. Historically, World War II, when we went to war against Japan and Germany in that order, it brought to a close an actual large period of white Christian nationalist activity in America, and that was America's Nazi movement, which there were millions involved, millions of American Nazis who supported Hitler and hated Roosevelt. And wanted to see Hitler win in Europe. It was a massive movement back then. They filled Madison Square Garden. Nazis did fly the American flag and the swastika together several times. But the war itself tamped down the temperature on American Nazism for the 1930s. And I'm curious, and so war has a way sometimes of bringing things bad things to an end. It happened in the Civil War as well. The Civil War brought the end of slavery. World War II helped bring the end of Nazism, and in America, America's Nazis. Sometimes war does have the effect of bringing to a halt some really evil things that are happening. And it may be that the Ukraine war helps bring to an end aggressive, violent attempts by Vladimir Putin in Russia, who, as you may know, is basically a Christian nationalist leader. The Russian Orthodox Church is in tight alliance with Putin. They're very conservative. The Russian Orthodox Church is very nationalistic, and many white evangelicals in America support and like Putin because he is believed to be making Russia Christian again. So, with the world seeing how Putin and his Christian nationalism in Russia are playing out in Ukraine, that may tamp down on some of the Christian nationalist momentum as well. One more piece, and then we'll do some conversation back and forth here together. This is from Clark Sherman, who is pastor, retired Episcopal priest here, and I want to read just one brief sentence from him. And this is my word to us, leading to conversation for the rest of our time. We don't have to be the church of empire. We don't have to be. It's true that much of Christian history, institutional church has been empire Christianity. And Christian nationalism is empire Christianity. It's about power. And beyond power, I think cruelty as well. So, war can have an effect on how we bring Christian nationalism to an end, perhaps ultimately. I would talk about serving in politics, legislature, laws. Ultimately, it's the judiciary, it's the courts that are right now probably doing the heaviest lifting of all in fighting against Christian nationalism in America. It's happening here in Montana. I just read this morning the court struck down one of the abortion bills that Gianforte signed, for example. Unanimous decision by the Montana Supreme Court because it's unconstitutional. The courts are a huge backstop to anti-constitutional, anti-democratic efforts, pro-theocracy efforts of Christian nationalists. In persons who were chosen to be, whether it be Supreme Court justices or federal court justices below them, or even statewide justices, it's really, really important. The law. I don't know if we have any lawyers in the room, but sometimes I am prone to think we need to be very, very thankful, it's true, for lawyers who are behind the scenes standing up to some of the awful legislation which is passing in state houses across America. Maybe not even standing up visibly, but behind the scenes as lawyers are working. And for the past 40 plus years, one of the key strategies of Christian nationalists has been to control the legal system, to gain control of the legal system so they can enact whatever they want to on the road to theocracy. And then otherwise, knowledge, sharing with others, connecting with other people, and us having a mindset that we need to be in a society, culture, nation which seeks the well-being, not just of some people, but all people. I want to stop right there. So let's. I want to hear some feedback. I think each of us, whether professionally or individually, can make a difference. I'm open to questions. I have some suggestions, but I don't want to be the only one talking here as well. Yes.
How organized are all of these organizations? Is there a leader? You know, we've got so many White Christian Nationalist organizations, but do they communicate? Is there somebody that's kind of driving all of this?
They have networks. They're scattered around. the Council for National Policy in Washington, D.C., if there's a leading network, it's probably it. It's kind of a secret organization. A lot of major far-right politicians in some of the highest positions in the land. I think Supreme Court Justice Thomas I know I've read he's a part of it. His membership. The membership list is kept secret, but it's leaked sometimes. So if you look up Council for National Policy, you can read more about that. Tim LaHaye of the Left Behind book series, the Dominionist theologian, was one of those who's a part of that. So yes, they're very well organized. They're very influential. They're very powerful. They move a lot of levers. There's any folks in the family, American Family Association, many out there, and many new ones. It's hard to keep track of all of them. So we don't have, and by the way, we don't have anything like that. We don't have that kind of system of inclusive to the point that they do of inclusive organizations which are seeking to work for the well-being of all people, or to be inclusive. We don't have that. That's something that needs to happen. That is something that needs to happen. They spent probably billions of dollars over the years developing this systematic structure. We have some good organizations out there, but nothing to compare to the infrastructure they have. Yes.
So, I agree about the politicians getting elected. My concern is looking at a young Republican legislator from Billings, a young woman who basically resigned because she was not voting according to the ways that her party was saying that she needed to vote. So, if you see that sort of thing happen and you're alone, it feels like you need to have more of those young people, but to try to get them to know what they're going to be up against seems like that is going to be a hard struggle.
Yes. I will say up front, there are no easy answers to this. There's a bit that can be done here, a bit that can be done there, a bit that can be done there, and you put it all together and maybe it can make a difference. There's no one answer unless there's someone or someone's out there that are willing to invest money into helping what we think of as inclusive, not just Christians, I mean inclusive America, to create infrastructure organizations that can go toe-to-toe with that which the Christian nationalists have as they attempt to bring about a theocracy. I think what's happened is that many of us, broadly speaking, who saw this coming? Really. I've been following for years the far right, but I wouldn't have thought they could have gotten this far. So it caught us by surprise. There's the momentary issue of how we can address this, and it is a very urgent momentary issue. There's also the long-term structural issue. And I'm talking about 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road right now. There needs to be work to lay the ground game for that 20, 30 to 50 year time frame, so this can never happen again. So you got to fight it now and prepare for the future. Right now, there's nothing systematic I'm aware of being done. We're fighting brush fires right now. Not just brush fires, we're battling wildfires right now. But so far, nothing's being developed long term. To bring this really personal to all of us here, it takes conversations to change things, whether that be in the halls of the legislature here or in D.C. In rooms like this, in communities. It takes conversations. Do you struggle to even think about how to have conversations across the aisle? Mm-hmm. Do not we all struggle that way? I think it still can be done. It's really uncomfortable. Probably some of you wouldn't even know how to begin a conversation. In divided America, many of us don't have friends across the aisle anymore. But I don't know of a more immediate way for most of us to begin to change things, then not to just have conversations like this in this room, but to be able to sit down with folks who are across the aisle and have conversations with them. Despite all of what I've said, in the danger and the cruelty, I think it is cruelty, on the far right of Christian nationalism, we are still talking about fellow human beings. Are we not? Sure, for those who are down the rabbit hole of cruelty, perhaps they cannot be pulled out. But there are a lot of people who believe that America is founded as a Christian nation and really believe that America should be a Christian nation, and all that involves believing in hell and this angry God of hell. Can we have conversations? Can we have conversations with folks like this? Yes.
Yeah, so that's something after your last presentation, my husband and I were talking about is, I think we have real fear about the dangers of having these conversations, right? You honk your horn at someone who cuts you off, and the next thing you know, you're getting shot at through the car window. I work up on campus, and in the recent months, there's been a number of student groups, LGBTQ, the Asian student groups, the Americans for Freedom group, who've all had violent threats on their life from other fellow students who sit next to them in biology class. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how do we have these conversations without quite literally fearing for our safety and our life?
Which is magnified by guns. I mean, guns are everywhere, it seems like, in the far right, and they really are these days. I can share with you my experiences, and for what it's worth. And I have come to believe that how we communicate with people really does make a difference. Everything from the tone of our voices, to our facial expressions, to the cues that we give off, and also how if we can see that in other people as well as we're having a conversation. And it can make a difference. It's easy to sit down with someone we don't agree with in a matter like this and want to be accusatory. Can we sit down with folks like that we may be literally afraid of, making sure there's no gun on the table in front of us, and actually seek to be inquisitive and seek to understand who they are and where they're coming from. This is tone, this is facial expression, this is communicating not anger, not being upset, but communicating an inquisitiveness and wanting to understand more and asking and inviting questions to allow them to begin speaking about themselves. There is something about genuine conversation, and I am not talking to someone. Mm-hmm. How many of us like to be talked to? Not many of us. I'm speaking of genuine conversations in which we can oftentimes. I do this. I've seen it happen. I've done it. I try to do it consistently, in which I seek to connect our humanity. Because even in those folks, I can think of Christian nationalists I know who I still wonder why they do the things they do sometimes. But I have, even just right out white supremacists, I've been able to have a face-to-face conversation and find a way to connect with them in a way that we can have a conversation without it turning into a brawl or me being shot. In a way that at least makes them to think a little bit and ask questions. It's so easy for us to tell people what to do or what to believe, but can we ask non-threatening questions that invite someone else to open up a little bit about themselves? And once they open up, in the way our minds work, and we know this in our own conversations, kind of one thing leads to another. Mm-hmm. And we begin to move towards somewhere inside of us as human beings, we begin to move towards our humanity. We begin to peel back, at least momentarily, the barriers that we put up and we find ways that we are similar, or we can understand each other and connect. This seems really simple in many ways. And in many other ways, though, it seems really hard. Because I think, isn't it hard to have a conversation like that to someone that you don't really like in the first place? I mean, really. But if we can't do this, this is something any of us could do, we could. But if we can't, what does that tell us about the future? If we can't take an initiative ourselves, sometimes changing a person's life, and I bet we could have some witness to that here, it comes over time. It doesn't happen right away. None of us can sit down, probably, at a table and within an hour's time convert a white Christian nationalist. I mean, really. But I think all of us as human beings have the opportunity, if we so choose to take it, to sit at a table, not to talk to, but to have a conversation with, do less of the talking and more of the listening, and responding appropriately from what we're hearing. I think we all could do this, and it could make a difference if we did it, and many others did it as well. Let me stop right there. Yes.
I mean, I get back to the notion of kind of finding commonalities. So, regards to don't focus on your differences, but try to break down a topic in regards to where is that common ground that you both agree on, and build from that foundation of common interest and common bonds, and that kind of can breed your conversation up with regards to where it goes from there.
That's right.
In regards to when I have fights and stuff like that, I kind of break them down into where's our common goal? Like, what is the common basis? And then we can kind of work through our conflicts, working up from there.
Right.
Just to add on to that, like, you can listen first sometimes. You know, like, talking about inclusivity, you can't just talk at somebody, you can listen first, hear where they're coming from, and then ask those thought-provoking questions, then we'll look at it a different way.
Right.
And be open to changing your thoughts. And again, in regards to, okay, I didn't think of it that way, or
Yeah, that dialogue.
yeah. The book that I just read not too long ago, I think you're wrong, but I'm listening. It's the two gals that are Democrat, Republican kind of background. It kind of breaks down, like, how do you have that conversation of those? And I think it's a great sort of structure of how to think about it.
You can kind of look at the understand the other side.
I think it's important, when I look around the room here, I see a lot of gray hair. I don't know about your children, but my children don't attend church all the time. So, I think it's imperative on us to have conversations with those 40-year-olds saying, I guess wanting to lump ourselves with them. I think we have to be more inclusive about, we're sitting here as a faith group, but I think even branching out to those people in our own circles is really important to talk about who to elect and why, and what we're thinking, and why we're coming to those conclusions as Christians, but not obviously Christian nationalists.
That's good.
I'm speaking as a theologian and as a chaplain. Part of what I'm trying to do is befriend those group of people who are under attack from Christian nationalism. To let them know that I have your back in the ballot box. I have your back in terms of denouncing what I see are discriminatory laws. And as a theologian, to denounce white Christian nationalism, to say this is not my understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and being consistent in preaching and teaching and interacting with folks so that this community of faith is known as a place that worships a God who loves all, who calls all people into relationship with God, and to denounce those elements which would seek to divide us. And part of that challenge is to be consistent in that message. And just an add-on, because of your presentations, I'm monitoring my media consumption. I mean, in terms of what I'm taking in and digesting. I read an interesting article in this weekend's New York Times. The group that I associate with is very good at reading stuff, and my understanding of more far right wing has a different way of consuming the media, and that's going to be a significant challenge in terms of trying to find common ground. Because I like to read, I don't like to watch TV. That's a challenge we face.
We have to sit face to face, don't we, rather than interact digitally, if we're going to ultimately make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get back to the whole notion. I mean, I don't know where I fall in the whole spectrum of people. I mean, I'm mid-40s is where I'm at right now. So again, I can't call myself young anymore, but I'm not ready to call myself old. Darn it. But I guess with that being said, from the standpoint of just the community here, it would be, I mean, like I have fundamental Christian people that I associate with in other avenues of my life. And having those just talking points with regards to, okay, what are the messages? What are those things? So again, when I point to it, when somebody pulls an obscure thing out of like the Old Testament or something like that and throws it at me, I'm just like, that's not Christ's teachings. But again, I don't necessarily, I'm not in the Bible. I'm not kind of like digging through note-taking and kind of throwing things back. But again, there's some inherent, where I'm at in my life and what I believe to my core with regards to love, grace, offering those things when I'm interacting with people, and how does that support it in just here? This is the message. Here's where it talks to me, and I want to be able to do that quickly with regards to, hey, this is where I'm at.
That's where it's important to be informed, I think, is kind of what I'm hearing you saying. And which takes time for all of us to do that. I know our time's up. Speaking of time.
It's time.
It's time.
Yeah, please join me in giving